All right, everyone. I hope everyone's having a good day. I'm having a pretty good day. I hope that this will come up. Hope this will work. I've had a little trouble with this, but it's all good now. I hope you guys are able to get the handout. I had a little trouble with that primarily, and yeah, let's dive right in. As you guys could probably tell from this first slide, we're going over the Youth for Christ movement, and some of the things we will be going over for the Youth for Christ movement is the movement itself, its history, the goals, or the goal of this movement. Some of the men that are a part of this movement, we'll be going over men like Billy Graham, Cliff Barros, Jack Hamilton a little bit. And we'll be going over the pros and cons of this movement and what we can learn from this particular movement, some of the things that we can take from and apply to our goals in the youth ministry. So the movement itself started in the 1940s or the mid-1940s. Its founder was Jack Hamilton. This movement was primarily had young evangelists and young ministers come in and preach for them, preach at these rallies, gathering together all these young people and anyone who was interested in these youth rallies. And they would come in, and these young ministers and evangelists, they would preach to them, and do everything they could to try to convince them, to try to get them to make decisions for Christ, to get them to make, commitments for Christ. Most of these, rallies were held in the North American region. There were several large ones over there in England, just to name a few, but primarily they were over here in America. And the first full-time staff member of the Youth for Christ movement or club was the famous evangelist Billy Graham. In fact, we'll go over him in just a little bit. The mission statement of the Youth for Christ movement, this is something that I found very interesting. It's on their website, and they're talking about their movement and what they do. Youth for Christ. The Youth for Christ movement reaches young people everywhere, working together with the local church and other like-minded partners to raise up lifelong followers of Jesus who lead by their godliness in lifestyle, devotion to the Word of God and prayer, passion for sharing the love of Christ, and commitment to social involvement. I just noticed that I made a typo there. It's YFC, not FYC. If you guys see that, take notes. Don't follow after me. Let's take a look at some of the goals of this movement. So their first and primary goal was simply to win young people for Christ, to get them to make decisions for Christ. Their other goals were to simply encourage others to do the same, to get them out in evangelizing, to get them out there winning souls, to promote evangelism everywhere, not just at youth rallies or at church or at outdoor knocking, but in the workplace as well, to get them to be evangelists, seeing the need to witness for Christ everywhere. Another goal of theirs was to promote a victorious Christian life for young people, to encourage them to strive for that Christian godly life. Another goal of theirs was to simply foster youth workers or young people into existing agencies or existing ministries in their local church, to get them involved in the youth ministry. They were doing everything they could to make sure that they were fulfilling the ministry, fulfilling the Great Commission, making sure that these young people kept their commitments and getting them to make commitments and keep their commitments and serve the Lord. That was their primary goal. Here we see a simple ad, or an example of an ad many of these rallies would have. This is something that you would probably find in most newspapers or flyers of whatever town the youth rally was going to be happening in. This is what led many young people to go visit the Youth for Christ rallies just to check to see what it's all about and stuff. Let's take a look here at some the more interesting stuff I thought about about the Youth for Christ movement, and let's take a look at some of the notable figures of this movement. First being its founder, Jack Hamilton. He founded the Youth for Christ movement, or Youth for Christ Club. He used to work with the Miracle Book Club before he went to Youth for Christ. In fact, he was in charge of the first Miracle Book Club in Kansas City. He wanted to reach young people in a more evangelic way. He had a passion for young people. The young people today are tomorrow's leaders and politicians and doctors and laymen. Young people today are our future tomorrow. And he had a passion for reaching them. He wanted them to get saved, but he wanted them to make commitments for Christ, make decisions for him, and keep those decisions for Christ. Take a look here at someone we all probably know and heard of, Billy Graham. We all know part of his story, or at least most of it. He was born November 7th, 1918. In Charlotte, North Carolina. He joined the Youth for Christ movement in the mid-1940s. In fact, Youth for Christ Ministries was actually what really put Billy Graham in the spotlight. It got a lot of the Youth for Christ movement got a lot of news coverage in the towns they were in, and many people heard Billy Graham speak, and this is what really set him on the path to become the famous evangelist that we all know him of today. He was the first person to be offered the chance, or he was the first one to be offered the chance to start the first night of rallies that would take place in Chicago. He became the vice president of the Youth for Christ International. Now we're going to take a look at someone some of you probably know of, and some of you probably don't. This guy I found to be very interesting. He's someone I really didn't know much about, and that is Cliff Barros. He was a great friend of Billy Graham. He became friends with Billy Graham at the Youth for Christ Ministries, in fact, or Youth for Christ rallies. In fact, this is where he first met Billy Graham. This man was a great song leader. In fact, his nickname was a man of song. He was known as being a man of song. He had many musical talents, and he was able to he had an ability to lead music and to just really touch people with his music. In fact, he was greatly used by the Lord. He had many musical talents. In fact, fun known fact, he played the trombone. Not many people know that about him. And he just loved to serve the Lord with his musical talent. It was his passion and his goal. In fact, many young people, and not just young people, but people in general who went to these youth rallies or went to these rallies went because of the music that was there. And he was greatly used. He greatly used his music to lead people, to get people in there, but that wasn't his goal. He just got him in, and he let Billy Graham let the Lord do the rest with whoever was speaking. It was just his goal to lead the music. The primary goal of Youth for Christ was to get people in and to get them to make decisions for Christ, and he played a great role in that by the music that he led people in. Now we're going to take a look at the pros and cons of this movement here. So the first pro being they focused on evangelizing our future. They focused on reaching young people. Now, they wouldn't turn away anyone who came in seeking to make a decision for Christ, but their primary goal was on young people, because as we said earlier, young people today is tomorrow's future. Their focus was on evangelizing them and getting them saved and getting them to make decisions for Christ. Their goal was to reach as many people as they could with their rallies. They put a lot of emphasis on living the Christian life and staying faithful to God, staying faithful to church, and keeping the commitments that they made. Some of the cons are there was no real growth. Almost every night you would hear a salvation message, and that was good, But if all you hear is salvation at night after night after night, you become stagnant. People hear the message, and they become hardened to it. They don't really grow from hearing the same thing over and over. It's like if I was to eat a Pop Tart every meal, I wouldn't really grow. I wouldn't gain the nutrients I need to grow physically. Now, like I said, salvation is an important message, and we need to be teaching that, but it shouldn't be the only thing people are hearing. They need to hear things that will help them grow. Another con for the Youth for Christ movement is the simple fact that they didn't check up on the churches that these young converts went to or started attending after their rallies. In fact, they pretty much left these young people high and dry after these rallies. They didn't know where to go, so they would often go to the churches that their grandparents went to or the churches that their friends recommended, whether that be a Catholic church or a Mormon church or Jehovah's Witnesses church. They would go to whichever one their friends went to, and there was no real growth with them. They didn't really check to make sure that these young people were going to churches that would help them grow and help them to keep their commitments. Another con for the Youth for Christ movement was simply that there was no real follow-up with the ones who made decisions. Months or years later, whenever they would go back to a city that they had previously had a rally in, all they would do is just send out flyers and invitations saying, hey, we're having a Youth for Christ rally here at this park or here at this church. Come on in, invite friends, bring people in, just come on in and hear so-and-so speak. We'll have great music and stuff, but they didn't really go back and check on the people who made commitments for Christ. They just didn't make commitments. They didn't check in on them, making sure everything was okay, making sure they were growing. They just left them high and dry, basically. So, what can we learn from this movement? Well, first thing we can learn is we can learn that evangelism is a good starting point, but it shouldn't be our only goal. Their primary goal was to get people to make decisions for Christ, to get to plant as many seeds as they could, to spread the gospel as much as they could to the young people. But there should be a little more than just that. There should be growth, things that will help them to grow. Young people, another thing we can learn from this movement is that young people are our future. In fact, if you look at many of our leaders and we have today, or many of our our leaders in general, whether they be on the local level or on our more high up political level, many of them were saved. Many of them were saved by attending these Youth for Christ rallies, or at least their parents or their grandparents were, and that's what led them. Those were the people who led them to the Lord, people who were saved at these rallies. Young people today, the way what we teach and how we help our young people today will greatly affect our future. We can learn how to draw young people in. Going back to Cliff Barros, he was greatly used to lead or to draw in many young people because of the music that he was able to teach. Now, it wasn't anything like secular or anything. It was Christian music, and he was able, his musical talent is what drew many people in there. And while they were in there, they heard the gospel. They had an opportunity to hear the gospel and get saved. One of the more important things I can think of that we can learn from this movement is simply the importance of following up with those who make decisions for Christ, keeping in touch and making sure that they're still growing, making sure that they're still everything's still going good for them, making sure that they're all right, and keeping their commitment to the Lord, keeping up with their decisions, staying faithful to their church, staying faithful to the Lord, make sure that they're growing in the Lord. That's pretty much it. I hope that the handouts work for you guys. These are my sources, my references for this PowerPoint. I hope you guys have a good rest of your day. And thank you guys for your time. Talk to you guys later.